Welcome to season 14 of the Parenting Aces podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Stone, and this week we have the incredible Mark Kovacs of the Kovacs Institute and the International Tennis Performance Association joining us to talk about all things related to injury prevention and treatment of injuries in our junior tennis players. Mark has an extensive background in our sport, both as a player and as a researcher and as someone who actually works one-on-one with athletes at all levels of the game. And I'm super excited to have him back. It's been quite a while since I've had the opportunity to get him on the pod, and he shares some incredible information and advice with all of you this week. We're going to have links to everything that he mentions in the show notes, so please be sure to check those out on parentingaces.com. And while you're on the website, make sure you check out our new merch in our online shop, as well as our one-to-one consults that are available to all of you. You get on with me one-on-one to talk about anything and everything related to your player's junior and college tennis journey. So for now, I'd love for you to sit back, relax, and enjoy this incredibly insightful and informative conversation with Mark Kovacs. Mark, it is so nice to have you back on the podcast. It has been a little while since we've gotten to chat with you, but I stay on top of everything happening in your world through your great communications and your social media posts and all. So welcome back.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. Always excited to be on and talking all things tennis and how to help those young athletes, do what they love and enjoy it and stay as healthy as possible.
You and I first met, over a decade ago, maybe like 15 years ago, at a conference where you were talking about fitness for tennis players and injury prevention and taking care of their bodies. And I have followed you ever since then, and the information that you provide to the tennis community, both to the coaches and to the players and families of players, has been so invaluable over the years. You've really developed all of your knowledge into easily digestible articles and videos, and I'm really excited to dive in today on the topic of injury prevention for junior players and the importance of taking care of their bodies, especially the players that are entering puberty and going through puberty when so much is changing physically and emotionally for these young players.
Yeah, thank you. It's a lot of fun and it's challenging sometimes because, like you said, you're trying to get the information out there in digestible formats with good scientific basis for it, but also in a way that people can apply immediately. And that's really the goal: is how can we make it simple enough so most people can do it, but also understand that, like all sports, tennis is highly personalized. Each individual athlete is personal. Their growth rates, their time on court, their intensity, their environment, the resources they have access to, that's all very different. So it's really challenging, I know, for parents and players to take advice through social media, through other channels, and apply it always, because you don't know, is it really applicable to you? So hopefully we can talk a little bit about that, how to observe or understand what's out there, make some good decisions, try to get some advice when you need it, things like that. Because although there's so much information out there, there's a lot of misinformation. There's way more misinformation than good information, and that's the problem with the accessibility now. It used to be 15, 20 years ago, there were books and there was, videos that took, weeks to film and edit and things like that. So you pretty much had people that had some skill sets, had some vetting, had some things before the information got out there. Now, with how easy it is to put information out there, my big caution is just be careful with everything you hear, read, see, listen to, that make sure you vet it as best as you can.
Well, that said, why don't you give our audience a little bit of your CV so that they understand your credentials and why you're here this week?
Yeah, most definitely. So yeah, I started as a tennis player and played grew up in Australia, played the ITF junior circuit, played a few junior grand slams, played doubles with Andy Roddick at the US Open Juniors, then won an NCAA title in doubles at Auburn, played college for 4 years there. Then went on into a research career, did my PhD in physiology, and was working as a researcher first. That was my initial plan, and then got an opportunity to work with the US Tennis Association to head up sports science and coaching education when the first player development facility was set up down in Boca. So I spent about 5 years there with USTA full time and still helped them a lot in different ways since then. But I left tennis for quite a few years. I worked actually, directed the Gatorade Sports Science Institute, where we worked with a lot of athletes, worked with the Brazil national team in soccer, worked with Ironman competitors, worked with NFL quarterbacks, Major League Baseball players. So a lot of different athletes in that world. Then spent some time in the NBA, spent 2 seasons with the Cleveland Cavaliers, heading up sports science and health, working very closely with the Cleveland Clinic as well on the medical side. So that was great because I was working in a different sport full time, traveling with the team, doing the whole thing. So it was a lot of similar things that we would do in tennis. Their schedule is kind of crazy. They have a lot of late night flights, landing at 2 or 3 in the morning, having to play games the next day. So they have some challenges like tennis players do when it comes to travel and environment and changes and things like that. And then also worked in resort healthcare. So I worked with a major resort healthcare company for a few years. And this was all in this combination of what the athletes do, but doing it for individuals looking to improve their health and longevity. So all in this world of sports science, sports medicine, nutrition, hydration, exercise, things like that. From a tennis standpoint, set up the International Tennis Performance Association about 15 years ago now, and that is a trade association that educates and certifies individuals that work with tennis athletes. So we have athletic trainers, physical therapists, chiropractors, medical doctors, tennis coaches that teach them how to work on the physical sports science side of tennis. And we're members in about 40 something countries. So we do a lot in that space from an education standpoint, and then also have the Kovacs Institute, which is our institute in Atlanta, where we work with some individual pro players in a few different sports, from a few girls on the U.S. women's national team soccer, a couple baseball guys that play in the major leagues, some golfers, professional golfers, and a few tennis players on tour. So that's sort of a quick rundown of some of the things we've got going on.
So, in case people weren't sure if Mark is qualified to speak on the subjects that we're going to be speaking on today, I hope you now are very confident in the information coming out of him. Mark, I mean, your resume is incredible and so impressive, and I really so appreciate you taking time to speak with us today about injury prevention in young athletes, and we are going to touch on the whole travel thing as well. You recently sent out an article on how to combat jet lag, which, we as tennis parents, we don't often think about the impact of travel on our kids when we're taking them here and there for tournaments. But even if they're not changing time zones, they're sleeping in a different place, they're eating different food, their schedules are kind of off kilter oftentimes, their sleep patterns are off kilter. So all of this to say that there's so many facets of junior tennis development other than hitting the balls on the court, and taking care of the body is at the core of it. So again, thank you for being here. And first question for you is, in your opinion, what is the most important thing that developing junior athletes can do to protect their bodies from injury?
Yeah, so if you had to rank order things, it's a great question. How do you prioritize your off-court training to try to protect the body? Number one is actually getting really good endurance shape, because that is one that I think sometimes doesn't get talked about enough. Everyone's worried about strength training, speed training, hitting tennis balls, all of this stuff, which obviously is really important. But the number one thing that can help people reduce the likelihood of injury is to reduce fatigue, when you're playing matches and when you're practicing. So having great aerobic conditioning is paramount. It's sort of the foundation. If you don't have good aerobic conditioning, it doesn't matter how well you serve, how hard you hit the ball, how well you move in and out of the corners, because you're only going to be able to do that for a few minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 45 minutes. So make sure that conditioning is right up there. So that's really important. The challenge for a lot of people is how do you do that so you don't overtrain? Because you're playing so much tennis on court, you just can't go out and run for hours after that. That's not a wise thing to do either. So you have to combine your running type activities, which is tennis is part of that, and then your off court, lower impact stuff. So bike work, versa climbers, things that pull work, things that don't require the joints to get heavy pounding. But I always say that's number one. If you don't have work capacity, everything else we talk about is secondary. It's like an ice cream with toppings. You can have great toppings, but if there's no ice cream there, you've got really no dessert. So we need to make sure that you develop that foundation, that work capacity. So that's number one. Then if you were going to go below that, then it's the major areas of the body that we know tennis has the most likely injury risk. So lower back is always a major focus, especially in the growing athlete. So the L4, L5, S1 area of the lower back, the lumbar spine, is a real risk area during growth. So we have to be careful with that. So we have to do a lot of core training, a lot of glute training, a lot of things around that area to get everything strong around there. But secondarily, you have to work on technique because we know volume and technique are the two major risk issues for lower back injuries. So excessive volume, which is a real concern for some players, and then poor technique. And usually the poor technique happens a lot on the serve. They have incorrect mechanics, and as a result, they over rotate early. And then with the spine, what happens is you get an excessive flexion of the spine, and then that's where you make impact with the ball. And that causes a lot of this rotation, and then excessive flexion of the spine is where we get a lot of those stress reactions, pars fractures, stress fractures in the lower back. So I always start there because that's the one injury that most tennis players are going to be out for a long period of time if they don't take care of that and prevent that. So make sure we focus there. Then you have the next sort of areas are shoulder and elbow are becoming a real problem in the younger athletes. You never used to see as much shoulder and elbow at 12, 13, 14. Now you're starting to see more of that creep up. That's partly technique related, partly volume related. And then the big question now, which you didn't have as much of an issue in the past, is all this tinkering with equipment as well. Rackets, strings, grip sizes, weighted rackets, customization, all this stuff that the juniors are now doing. In the past, most of the time, the juniors wouldn't be too concerned about equipment till you sort of got into that 15, 16, 17 age range. Now, a lot of people are doing some crazy stuff at 9, 10, 11, 12, and they're using adult models and trying to put it down on a growing young athlete. You have to be real careful with that. So I'm seeing more and more issues with people tinkering with rackets and things like that and not understanding the negative aspects of that with rackets and string and adjustments. So just be careful with that. And then the last big one on the growing athlete is usually the knees. So we have a lot of growth related knee pain. And when I say growth related, that covers a few different things. You've got Osgood-Schlatter's, you've got patellotendonitis, you've got a few of these core knee issues that we see a lot of. And many of those are really just growth related, meaning that they will go away over time, but you have to also listen to your symptoms. You don't want to push through pain. So what we usually say on that is if you have initial discomfort, so very mild, a 1 to 4 on a pain scale, so enough that you can still practice, but the player starts to feel something. Usually I automatically recommend a 30% reduction in volume, meaning if you everything you do training wise that is impact is 20 hours a week, you reduce volume by 6 hours. That'll get you down to about 14 hours. If that doesn't have the pain go away, then we got to sort of address it. We got to be like, okay, after a week or two of reducing volume, you're still having the same or worse. Then we got to go see someone and get it addressed. And those are some quick, easy strategies that may be helpful.
No, those are great. And I want to say, all of these areas are super important to pay attention to. And teaching our junior players how to put language to what they're feeling in their body so that they can tell you as a parent or tell you as a coach what's going on is key to all of this as well. Because if we as the adult in the equation aren't aware of what our junior player is feeling, then how are we going to help them? And so I think this is a big challenge, Mark, is teaching our kids not only to tune into their bodies and be aware of what they're feeling, but then also to be able to verbalize that to the adult in the room. Do you have some tips on that?
Yeah, so I always discuss this. Is it discomfort? Is it pain? Or is it truly an injury? There are really three levels. Discomfort is nearly every day. You're an athlete, there's going to be something that doesn't feel great. You've got a soft tissue issue, you've got a little niggle somewhere. It doesn't affect you practicing, but it doesn't feel perfect. That's pretty normal, but it shouldn't be. You have to address those because that's a bigger signal of something maybe in sleep, in nutrition, in your hormone levels. There's all sorts of reasons for discomfort. So be addressing that, but that's not something that should be seen as an injury. And then you've got real pain, real pain that is, everyone knows what that feels like. It doesn't feel right. Every time you hit a ball, it doesn't feel good. Things like that. That needs to be addressed. That's not normal. That's not something that'll usually just go away. That's something that you actually do have to address. And then real injury is a diagnosis. You've got a tear in your hamstring. You have rolled your ankle and it's blown up and there's actually an injury there. Those things require significant treatment and significant care to bring you back appropriately. So those are usually the three buckets that I always look at. And you want to deal with the discomfort in a way of, how's everything feeling? Not asking, does anything hurt or anything like that. That's not a good opening statement. You just say, how's the body feel? What's going on? What are you noticing? And if you've done this right, they're going to be like, everything feels great, but my hip flexor sometimes feels a little tight. Okay, that's really useful information to then work on and develop. Is it a mobility issue? Is it possibly a strength issue? Because tight doesn't necessarily just mean flexibility issues. That could be it's not strong enough, so every time it loads, it creates a bit of this discomfort. So that's the way I usually approach it, is just ask that simple question. How's the body feel? What are you noticing? And usually if you've got a good relationship with the player, whether it's a coach or a parent, they're going to be like, yeah, everything feels really good. It's just I notice this sometimes. And that's a note that needs to be made. And then a program of some sort needs to be created to deal with that and address it so that that doesn't become a bigger issue. And you can usually get ahead of most major issues if you do that at least on a weekly basis. Doesn't have to be every day. You don't want to create problems that don't exist, because that's the other problem I see sometimes is people are too conservative and they're asking too many questions and they're getting too into the weeds, and then the player many times feels like they have to say something. And I've noticed that with some great players is if you have accessibility to all these people and experts and things like that, and they're always asking questions, the players are going to say something at some point, partly just to shut you up and stop you asking questions. But you've got to be careful not to overdo the questioning either.
Yeah, that's a great point. That is a great point. But I think the last time you were on the podcast, we were talking about periodization, and it's been a minute since I've tackled that topic. So while I have the expert here, I want to talk about the importance of building a well-rounded training for our developing juniors so that these issues, the minor and the major ones, can be addressed in a way that doesn't necessarily set the junior back in their development, but maybe allows them to take a step back to address the problem, but also develop other areas of their game while they're allowing the niggle or the injury to actually get better.
Yeah, no, it's so important. And the good thing about junior tennis is you have time if you do it right, and you have the ability to set your schedule a little bit. You've got your major events you've got to play to qualify for other events, but outside of that, you've got a lot of flexibility in what you play, when you play, things like that. So you want to just simply put, if you were going to say, give some base recommendations. So a junior competitive player that's trying to play at a high level, let's say trying to get to college at some point in their development, they should structure their year ideally where they have at least 4 1-month blocks where they're not playing tournaments. Reason being is their recovery blocks, their training blocks, they're adjusting things without the competitive stress or the concern of competitive stress, and that's at a minimum. You can do more than that. You can have 2 month blocks without competing. There's nothing wrong with that. But as an absolute minimum, there should be 4 blocks throughout the year, somewhat strategically placed, that you can actually put time in either to completely rest. So it could be a true off season of rest where you go a month. You may pick up the racket, you may not. There are some players that really don't want to pick up the racket. That's fine. Go a month without hitting a ball and then build up slow from there. Or hit balls twice a week for 30 45 minutes just to keep the racket in your hand and keep moving, but you're really going to work on a lot of other things physically or rest. So that's really important as a starting point. So you build those blocks of time at the beginning, and then you figure out from there, work backwards from your tournament schedule. What are your major tournaments? What are your minor tournaments? I always use a 3 step process to evaluating tournaments. So you've got a tier 1 tournament, which is, your, let's say your nationals. That's your tier 1s. Those are the ones that you got to play well in, you want to somewhat peak for, things like that. Then your tier 2s could be your regionals, your qualifiers, something like that, that you got to do well in those. They may even be tier 1s, depending on where your ranking is, because you may not be ranked high enough to make the nationals your tier 1. So regionals may be your tier 1. So do it based on that. Then tier 2 are tournaments you want to play well in because it's important, you like it, you want to get good results, obviously, things like that. So tier 2 are the majority of tournaments you play throughout the year. And then tier 3 are equivalent to practice matches that you would play at your club. So they're a tournament. You may drive somewhere. Hopefully you don't have to travel too far to play a tier 3. But the goal there is I want to get some competitive matches. I want to feel the environment of a tournament, but I'm training the week before. I'm maybe training during those matches completely, and I'm treating it just like I would a practice match at my club. So that's, if you go into tournament planning with that mindset, it makes it a lot easier to figure out what tournament levels are, how you're going to structure it, and then how you're going to train around it and through it. Because tier 3s we train through, they're just like practice matches. Tier 2s, we're going to make sure they feel really good going into it, but we're not going to reduce volume significantly. And then tier 1s are truly that environment is rest, recovery, making them feel as fresh as possible. So the pros do this. You have Grand Slams, you have Master Series, and then you have 250s and 500s on the men's side. Those are tier 3s for those guys. They're playing them, but they're less concerned, and they're usually training through a lot of those, and they want to play well at the Master Series and then obviously the Slams.
Yeah, I love that approach to things. And I think for the parents out there, if your coach isn't doing that with your child and with you as a family, maybe you want to share this podcast episode with them to encourage them to incorporate that type of planning and scheduling into the calendar. And look, this isn't something you do once at the beginning of the year and it's set in stone. You can make adjustments throughout the year. If an injury occurs, if a big family event pops up on the calendar that changes how you approach things, those have to take priority, but at least you're starting with some sort of structure and then you work from that forward. And I
Yeah,
mean,
I'm so
the
glad you mentioned that because that is true. Like you can plan at the beginning of the year, but we know that tennis is a dynamic sport. Schedule changes a lot. Your results dictate sometimes what you get into and what you don't. So you have to be flexible. Give you examples at the pro level. What we do a beginning off-season planning. So in December time, you plan the year out in big picture, And then every quarter, you do a revision to the plan for the next quarter every 3 months or so, that you adjust. And then each week you look at the plan because rankings may change. Like you said, injuries may come up and you may have to pull out of an event. And then that changes what the next month is going to look like because you may need to add another event to the back end of the month to get matches. So it's always a dynamic process. But if you plan, just like in any other aspect of your life, you're going to have a better likelihood of success than just going through this randomly.
And I love this whole idea of these 1 month training blocks as well, which will allow for things like family vacations and, taking time to do something other than be on a tennis court or at a tennis tournament, which I wish I had understood better during my son's developmental years. I thought it had to be all tennis every day, all through the year. And boy, was I wrong about that. And I now better understand it. And I want other families to better understand that so that this whole journey is a more positive experience.
Yeah, it's so important, and thank you for saying that. That like this concept of playing all year is going to make them better. It's doing a disservice because no one can do it all year. I mean, even the best players that I work with, all the ones that are top 20 in the world now that had great junior careers, none of them played 12 months straight. They didn't play tournaments every weekend. They had significant training blocks, and many of them had multi-month blocks without big events. And it's really important because you have to build up skills. Remember, it's all a concept of developing skills and stacking skills. It could be improving that slice backhand. It could be adding more, strength to the lower body. It could be, reducing the fatigue that people have during multi matches. It could be improving diet. All of these things, it's much easier and many times much better to do these things during a block of time where the competitive stress is reduced and they can feel more confident and comfortable at giving all their energy to some of these other areas.
And especially like you're mentioning, diet changes, sleep changes, looking at hydration and trying out different products to stay well hydrated. When this airs, we're coming into the end of summer. A lot of our players are back at school, whether that means in person or virtually. Our big national events are complete, though we've still got the Junior US Open ahead of us. And hydration and overheating are big concerns during the summer months. As we head into the summer season on the other side of the planet, we've got that all over again. So, Mark, maybe can we talk a little bit about the importance of hydration, how to manage hydration, and combining good hydration with travel and how to manage all of that to keep our athletes healthy and able to play at their peak.
Yeah, so I think tennis players in general sort of understand the concept of hydration. Tennis is usually played majority of the year outside in relatively hot, sometimes humid conditions, depending on where you're located. So tennis has a history of being a sport that chases the sun and it's in warm environments. So most people, I think, understand hydration and the standpoint of we need to drink, we need to get enough fluid in our system. But I don't think most people understand how difficult that actually is to do. Because when we are playing tennis, I'll give you some broad numbers here. So men sweat and boys sweat more than girls. Historically, there's always an exception, but in general, that's what we see. And when you're fully getting into puberty and definitely past puberty, the sweat glands are fully developed. So we don't see as much sweating pre-puberty. That's why we don't really see cramping as much. We don't have a lot of those issues at those younger ages. As they get into puberty, we start seeing the sweat glands fully evolve and we see a lot of sweating. And you got individuals that are heavy sweaters and or salty sweaters. You can be either, you can be both, you can be none. So that's the problem with standard recommendations. There's a lot of variables when it comes to sweating, and what type of sweat an individual has. So it's always difficult to say, hey, this person did this and it worked for them, so I'm just going to copy them. That's a really bad recommendation because their sweat rate's different, their sodium levels are different, things like that. So be careful with just copying someone else's strategy. It doesn't usually work very well. But in big picture ideas, you want to make sure that you're replenishing what you lose during matches or training sessions. And for most players, they're going to sweat anywhere between 1 liter and 2.5 liters per hour. And 2.5 liters is a really high sweat rate. They're the people that change shirts 4 or 5 times in a match. Their shoes get sweated through. So there aren't that many that are that high. Most people are between 1 and 1.5 liters per hour. And the challenge with that is your body can only consume comfortably due to gastric emptying and some other factors, only about 1.5 liters per hour. So if you're sweating anything more than 1.5 liters an hour, you actually can't replace that while you're playing. So you actually end up at a deficit at the end of the match. So if you're in a 3-hour match, you may be losing a liter an hour if you're a heavy sweater. That's 3 liters, which is a huge, huge amount of fluid that you lose over the course of a match. And that's where most of these problems arise from. People don't realize, they say, I'm drinking. You're drinking a lot. You're drinking close to your max during the match, but that's never going to be enough on what you're losing. So that's where one of the big issues are. That means that your pre-drinking needs to be really important. The night before, the morning of, the 2 hours before. So we want to make sure that we're hydrating a lot leading into it. And when we hydrate, we want to make sure we've got enough electrolytes in there as well. Water by itself isn't enough. So there's a lot of different sports drinks, a lot of different electrolyte powders out there. But in general, we're trying to get for most junior players anywhere between 500 milligrams and upwards of 1,000 milligrams an hour of sodium. That's sort of the range that most people will fall within. There are some people I've worked with when we do sweat testing and electrolyte testing that they need actually 1.5. So 1,500 to 2,000 milligrams per hour, which sounds like a lot, which it is, but they're sweating it out. So it's just pretty much balancing what they're losing. So make sure that you think about it from that standpoint leading into the matches or the practice sessions, not only during the practice sessions or the matches. That's where a lot of people make the mistake. And then post, it's really important because if you're playing 2 matches in a day or if you're playing it multi-matches in a week, it's this cumulative effect that we see problems. We either see problems in the first round with people breaking down because they're not acclimated to the environment and or the mental stress of playing a first round and the competitive anxiety that happens causes muscle tension, which also leads to, say, cramping. So cramping is multifaceted. There's at least 12 factors that may contribute to cramping. So it's not as simple as saying drink more, take more electrolytes, eat a banana, whatever the things you've heard, take pickle juice. It's not as simple as because 1 or 2 things will cure it because you don't know the cause. Many juniors have competitive stress anxiety that causes muscle tension, and muscle tension is a big factor in it. So you want to address that. Then there's also genetic factors that play into it with individuals, and you have to sometimes address that. So there's all sorts of strategies when it gets to significant sweaters and significant individuals that cramp. Muscle fiber type plays a role. We typically see individuals that are leaner, that have more muscle mass, actually have a higher percentage of cramp scenarios. So individuals that visually may look super fit actually have a higher risk sometimes of cramping. So that's an area to focus on. And my big one, which a lot of people don't always understand, is that most of the time they're just not fit enough. As much as they think they are, they're not fit enough for the demands of the competitive environment. They may practice 20 hours a week on court, but the intensity of practice is so low. So they're out there, they hit a lot, they're out there, but they're not pushing at the same intensity as matches with all the competitive environments, the fist pumping, the come-ons, the yelling, the screaming, the stress of winning and losing. All of that is different in a match than it is in practice. So make sure that you really evaluate your fitness training to make sure that you're doing enough of that above and beyond many times just playing.
And I will say too, there is a danger of oversalting, over electrolyting, that can come back to bite you as well. So that's why having these analyses done, and it's become much more accessible to have these tests done to understand exactly what your specific player's challenges may be and addressing the individual needs, as Mark just said, not just copycatting what others in your academy or at the tournament are doing, becomes super important.
It's so true, and it's valuable to just evaluate from an education standpoint and also a confidence standpoint. I was working with a pro player this past week who's playing in Cincinnati, and adapting, adjusting at that level because environment's different than Canada. That's going to be different again. So you have to make adjustments, and you've got more data, more personalization to allow for that to happen.
Where can families go to get these sweat tests or these evaluations of muscle fiber type
So
and
yeah,
all of it?
there's a few different ways. The easiest, simplest way initially is if Gatorade has a really simple patch that you can buy. It's an at-home thing that you can do, and it'll tell you your electrolyte levels. Are you a salty sweater? Are you not? It's not going to go into a highly precise, but it's going to put you in a category. So, and for most people, that's enough. You just want to know, am I at that high level, medium level, low level? And if you're at the high level, you got to be upwards in that 750 milligram to say 1,000 milligram of sodium. That's probably where you're going to live, and you go down from there. So Gatorade patches are really good for electrolytes to evaluate, and then just your sweat rate. The easiest way to measure that is to do it yourself, honestly, because all you're trying to do is weigh yourself before you go on practice. And then when you finish a practice session in hot, humid conditions, an intense practice, then you want to weigh yourself when you get done and try not to go to the bathroom. If you do need to go to the bathroom, then you need to adjust for the fluid lost when you went to the bathroom, which for some people is a little hard to do. It's easy for me because I've done over 1,000 of these. So you just have them, go to the bathroom in a container that you measure how much they went, and then you take that off the top. But in general, you got to get an accurate scale. That's the challenge for some people. And then you're just looking at body weight changes, which is fluid changes over the course of a 2 hour practice. So that's the easiest way to do it. You can do it yourself if you want to. There's plenty of people in your area. Most sports nutritionists know how to do it. Most high level exercise physiologists know how to do it. So if there's someone in your area that you can reach out to that has that background.
Um, that's such great information, and thank you for that. I want to shift gears for a moment to the role that sleep plays in developing players' ability to perform at their maximum, and what we as parents need to be concerned about or looking at to ensure that our kids are getting enough quality sleep.
Yeah, so sleep's a big area of focus across all sports and industries as well. Everyone can do better with sleep. Doesn't matter how well you think you sleep, there's an opportunity for improvement there. And the two big factors is sleep time, which most people think they have a reasonable idea about. When do you go to bed? When do you wake up? That most people have an idea of that. But sleep quality obviously is a whole different discussion because sleep quality isn't just how many times do you wake up in the night, because that potentially is a problem, especially for athletes. Because if you drink a lot of fluid, you actually usually have to go to the bathroom once or twice during the evening. So you got to be careful with how much you drink leading into sleep, because that could actually negatively impact your sleep cycle because you have to go to the bathroom multiple times in an evening. So there's a risk to drinking too much the night before from a sleep disturbance standpoint. So you got to be careful there. And then now with the wearables and different things that are out there, you've got things like Whoop and Oura Ring and different mattresses actually that can measure sleep quality. You've got to be a little careful because many of them are estimates on estimates. So there's an error built in just by their mechanism and it's called an artifact, so how much you move through the night, which impacts the reading and the quality of the reading. So the error in itself, the way it's measured has error just because of the way it's being measured. It's not the gold standard, it's an estimate. And then how much you move and how much it moves affects that reading. So you've got error built on error, and you've got to be just careful with how you interpret those. But they do give general trends, not necessarily each night is the data you're looking at. You're looking at general trends over the course of a week. The reason trends are useful versus every minute or every night is because you may get some bad data every now and then. So if you do 7 days of data and one or two of the days aren't good, the other five are going to be pretty solid and you're going to see a trend there. So that's why I usually use those. If you're going to use those, use them for trends, not necessarily the specifics. Because the worst thing sometimes is people wake up, they feel great, but their watch or their ring or their app tells them, hey, you didn't get a good night's sleep. It told you you were below what you should be. And that just ruined their entire day. So I never like the athlete themselves seeing that data. I'd much rather the coach or the parent see it if you're trying to track it, because many times you're putting bad thoughts into a player's head unnecessarily. So be careful with how you utilize that. And then you can go into the whole aspect of the different aspects of sleep. You've got the alpha aspects, the delta aspects, the REM sleep, the latency and how many times they wake up as well. So now there are devices that we utilize sometimes to help people get to sleep sooner, because most people struggle, especially if they're stressed. Their mind races, and they don't actually get to sleep. They go to bed, let's say at 10 o'clock. They may not get to sleep till 11 or 11:15 because their mind doesn't settle down. And there's now
That's
devices.
me.
Yeah. And you
Yeah.
see that actually as people get older. You see it less in the kids. You see it more in the late teens into college and then the pro level. And one of the ways you do that is you try to bypass that first stage. It's not actually sleep, but it's the first stage of that last or awake cycle, and you're trying to bypass that so you move into sleep quicker. So there's all sorts of really cool things with neurotechnology right now. I'm spending quite a bit of time in that space. And over the next few years, there's a lot of things that'll help with sleep in bedrooms, but also on planes, which for traveling athletes like tennis players are, being able to take a nap, whether it's 30 minutes, 2 hours, whatever the flight is, it's one of the best uses of a flight is to try to sleep. There's not much better uses of flight time than sleeping. So if you can get a little bit of extra sleep during a flight, it can be a huge advantage.
Give us some tips, because I'm one of those that unless I've got a seat that goes flat, I'm not sleeping on the plane.
Yeah, so it comes down to comfort, obviously. You're one that sounds like they don't sleep very easily sitting up, which a lot of people don't. So, the sleep pillows is one aspect, so it keeps the neck in a more comfortable position. That is one.
Do you
Two,
have one you like?
not really. They're all very similar. I would try out a couple. Ones that are a little softer help certain people. If they're too thick and too high, sometimes they're too stiff. You want a little bit of give. So there's a lot out there. So I don't usually give a brand just because there are so many. I don't know all the brands, and it's a little bit of trial and error with players as well. The other thing is blue blocking glasses is really good for planes, because if you're going to put something on, eye shades are the other option. You can either have an eye shade or a sleep mask, or blue blocking glasses, one of the two, because that will help get you closer to the environment that you want. Then there's a couple really good ones out there, especially with sleep masks. So Therabody has a really good one. There are two types. One is actually have vibration as well. So it actually creates this environment where it tries to help you get to sleep sooner. And then there's just another really soft sleep mask. So Therabody's the brand. You can look it up. They have a couple really good ones there, and that helps a lot from that standpoint. The other thing is some type of noise canceling headphones or white noise headphones. Something that you can put yourself in an environment that creates sort of a cocoon. Now you've covered your eyes. You've got a noise that is relaxing, and you actually could be anywhere at that point. So you're trying to create an environment that makes it feel like you're not on a plane.
Love that. And talking about travel and playing, we've talked about hydration, we've talked about sleep. What are some of the other factors that might come into play for these young players that are at a level where they are now traveling to play tournaments?
Yeah, so travel brings in a whole lot of factors. The most difficult one is the different beds and hotel rooms and Airbnbs wherever you're staying, because every place is different. Different mattress, strength. So is it firm? Is it soft? All of that. That's hard to control. The one thing I do recommend is always travel with your pillow. It's a simple strategy. I tell every competitive athlete, whether they're a club player who goes to sectionals or regionals or nationals and they're flying once a year to play in their event, take your pillow with you. Pack it, put it in check luggage. It's worth having a consistent pillow because pillows mess up sleep more than just about anything. Too firm doesn't feel good if you're not used to it, and too soft definitely doesn't feel good if you're not used to it. So make sure you travel with your pillow. And then a couple of things, just from a sleep hygiene standpoint, you know, making sure that your environment is as dark as possible. And many hotel rooms, many Airbnbs, they struggle with that. So you can go online and get a blackout shade that you can travel with. And it's real simple to put up and it can block out sunlight. So that's one option. And then the other thing is making sure that you be smart about setting the room temperature. Too many times they go to bed and then they realize a few hours later you wake up because you're too hot. And so you want to make sure that you err on the side of cold than warm when you're setting the thermostat. And many thermostats aren't accurate. So people will say, oh, I set it at 66 or I set it at 70. I'm like, that's great. But if you go to a different hotel, if you go to a different house, thermostats readings can be 3 to 4 degrees off. So be careful about just putting it on a number without testing it a bit, and test it before you go to bed to make sure the temperature's about right.
I love that. I love that. And gosh, you've given us so much great information, and I feel like there's so much more to touch on. We haven't even talked about warm-ups and cool downs and those types of things, and I want to touch on that as well. But one thing that I do think is so important to take away from this particular episode, Mark, is the importance of having professionals around our junior players who are educated on these different aspects of player health. It's not just about teaching technique and tactics. It's also about understanding the mental piece, the importance of sleep, the importance of hydration, what type of warm up and cool down need to happen, what type of dietary things need to happen over the course of training or during a tournament match or recovery. And I think it's a real challenge if you're not in a big city or a big tennis hub to find these types of professionals. The ITPA can help with that, right?
Correct. Yeah, so you're definitely right. Big cities, obviously, there's usually more people around that have different specialties and skill sets. But now with virtual, with a lot of the things we're talking about, a lot of this can be done virtually. So mental performance and mental health support can be done virtually. A lot of physical stuff can actually be started virtually. A lot of things when it comes to sleep, hydration, travel, schedule, you can map all that out through Zoom and plan all that. So obviously it's better to probably do it in person for some of these things, but I would say about 70% of my work now is virtual because I have athletes all over. I have, academies, groups, college programs, things like that that are all over. And the in-person work is valuable, especially if you haven't seen people, to get your hands on them, to see where they're at, to get a sense of what they like, don't like under certain environments. But when you're doing a lot of the follow-ups, it can be done virtually, and there are many, many options out there. So yeah, look for an ITPA, an International Tennis Performance Association certified individual. There's a lot of tennis coaches that have that background for the tennis coach side of things, because that means they're a bit more knowledgeable and well versed in those areas, and they can actually communicate better with all those specialists that we talked about, and they can actually work truly as a performance team, which is really important because the coach is very important and is leading all the tennis side, but there are all these other pieces that have to fit in, and they're sort of at the center with the parent. The coach and the parent have to sort of tag team this together and work together on how do we put this performance team environment together. And then you have all these specialists that have gone through the ITPA understanding, because many of them may not be tennis people. They may be physical therapists, they may be athletic trainers, sports nutritionists that have backgrounds in their skills, and they're very skilled in what they do, but they don't understand tennis environments. They don't understand the travel challenges. They don't always understand the injury aspects of tennis. They know how to train athletes, but they may not know how to train tennis players as well. So the ITPA certification gives them that extra skill set, and that gives them more knowledge in how to better work with tennis athletes.
So, if a parent wanted to locate these certified individuals, can they do that through the ITPA website?
Yeah, so they can email the ITPA for specifics if they're in a location. We don't have a searchable website, partly for privacy, because a lot of the
Sure.
individuals we have don't necessarily want everyone to just contact them, but we do help out. If people have questions, we can direct them to the right people in their areas.
Great. And we'll have that email address in the show notes on parentingaces.com, in addition to links to all of the different products that Mark mentioned today. We'll have those in the show notes as well to make it easier for you guys to find all of these things that we've been discussing. Mark, what else do you want families of junior players to know about protecting the health of their players?
Yeah, it's so important, and the problem is we see the extremes on both sides. We see the overcautious, not doing enough work, not training hard enough for the demands of competition, and that's a real risk. And I see that a lot now. I never saw that as much 10 or 15 years ago. It was usually too much overtraining. Now I still see overtraining, but I see a lot more of actually undertraining, underpreparedness for competitive matches, tournaments, lifestyle of being a competitive tennis player. So be cautious that you're not doing too little, because I'm surprised we have to have that discussion, but that really is a discussion. And now we still have a segment of the population that overdoes it. They just does more and more and more. They're getting better. Usually it's the people that are getting better that end up doing more and more because they've had some success, things are working, and they're like, I do 20 hours a week. Now let's do 25 hours a week. And you get to a point where the body and the mind both don't respond. And you can track that and you can get ahead of that very quickly if you're monitoring it. You just have to be aware of the symptoms. If the player's hoping that it's going to rain, that's a big one. If they're looking forward to not practicing, that's a real concern typically. So be aware of that. If they start complaining of a lot of little niggles, like not real injuries, but just a bunch of different things, knee pain, shoulder pain, wrist pain, whatever it is, that's a sign that something's not working. It could be volume, it could be diet, it could be sleep. We don't know the cause yet, but we know that you've got to address it. So you got to find the problem. So my biggest thing is listen to the symptoms. Don't push through all this stuff without having a plan. You may still train, may still work through some of these things, but make sure you've got a plan for why this is happening and get ahead of it. I get a lot of calls after the fact. Oh, they've got a stress fracture, or their shoulder's been hurting for a month and now they need to take 2 months off. What should we do? That's kind of late in the process. We'd like to get that very, very early and get ahead of it. Put a plan together early in the process so that you don't have to take months off, which is the real concern.
Yeah. And in terms of the undertraining, what are some of the signs that that's the case?
Yeah, it's a great question. Pretty much not lasting a match is a really good sign. If you go out there and play a three-set match and you just fatigue out, that's a sign that you're undertrained. I have some very simple things I've talked about over the last month. We got a little bit of attention was just, can you run 3 miles? It's a simple, non-specific activity. It's running. It's not very difficult. If you can't run 3 miles without stopping, that's obviously a problem. If you can't run 3 miles in around 20 minutes for most competitive junior players, that's also a question. It means that you're not in good enough shape just aerobically. It's got nothing to do with tennis. It's just got to do with, can you run 20 minutes? And it's interesting to see how many people are like, I've never done it. I don't know if I can. It's not tennis specific. That'll be the standard argument. Well, that's not the point. The point is, do you have any just general aerobic capacity? And if you can't run 20 minutes, how are we going to play a 2.5 hour match? So some of that stuff is kind of the areas that you'll see that quite easily. And good coaches should be able to observe that in a practice session as well. They do a drill and the player can't hit more than 10 balls before kind of slowing down in a side to side exercise. If you see them visually slow down in a drill, that means that they just don't have the capacity to do it, or they don't have the motivation, one of the two. But usually it's a capacity issue.
Got it. So, parents, coaches, you've gotten an incredible amount of information from Mark, who is the go to guy for all of this stuff. And I hope you will take all of this information in, use it to help your players reach their full potential. Reach out to Mark and the ITPA if you have any questions. Make sure you sign up on their website. They do regular email communications. Make sure you're following them on social media. They post some incredible videos. Mark himself will go on and explain things, and it's super helpful for those of you who are new to this and just kind of trying to educate yourselves. But Mark, thank you again so much for taking time to be with us. It's always a pleasure to see you, and I look forward to our next conversation.
No, thanks so much, Lisa, and keep up the great work. The more good information that gets out there to the parents and the players, the more better players we're going to have, and they're going to play tennis for a lifetime.
Love it. Love it. To our audience, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll catch you next time on Parenting Aces.